Why you keep disturbing what was starting to settle. Sometimes something in you is finally becoming quieter. The thought is fading. The tension is lowering. The feeling is no longer holding the whole field. And then, instead of letting it settle, you touch it again. You check it. You think about it. You test whether it is still there. At first, this feels small, almost harmless, as if you were only making sure the shift is real. But that movement matters, because what was softening is no longer being left alone. It is being disturbed. This is the pattern. Not only suffering, not only overthinking, the repeated act of going back into something that was already beginning to calm down. Why? Because part of the mind does not fully trust what settles quietly. It trusts what is active, what is loud, what is still moving. So when something starts becoming still, the system reaches in again, not always to hurt itself, sometimes just to check whether the old discomfort is truly gone. And that checking is often what brings it back. What makes this pattern so difficult to notice is that disturbing it does not feel destructive. It feels careful. You think, I just want to see how I really feel. I just want to be sure it is actually changing. I just want to check whether it still hurts. All of this sounds reasonable, but something important is happening underneath. The moment was quieting, and instead of letting quiet remain quiet, the mind re-enters. It touches the old place again. Not because the pain was still fully alive, because the calm did not yet feel believable. This is the deeper issue. Part of the system trusts disturbance more than settling. It knows how to live inside tension. It knows how to scan, test, measure, reopen. But when something softens, without effort, without drama, without a strong internal signal, the mind becomes suspicious. It asks, is it really over? Did it actually pass? What if I relax too early? That suspicion creates the next move. Another thought, another check, another small return to what was already fading. And that return changes the whole structure. Now what was settling has to respond again to contact, again to attention, again to evaluation, again to doubt. This is why some things take so long to quiet down. Not because they were so deep, because they were not left alone long enough to settle naturally. This is why the return can feel so innocent. You are not attacking yourself. You are only touching what was starting to go quiet, only checking whether it is still there, only seeing whether the old feeling still has the same force. But the system does not experience that touch as neutral. The moment you go back, the old area is no longer resting. It is being contacted again. And contact matters. A settled surface can become active again from very little. A thought, a memory, a question, a quick inward test. That is all it takes. Because what was calming down was not dead. It was settling. And settling is fragile when the mind keeps interrupting it. This is what makes the pattern so hard to stop. The checking feels like observation, but often it is stimulation. You are not only seeing what is left, you are reintroducing attention, doubt, and emotional contact to something that was finally losing force. This is why the old feeling can suddenly seem alive again. Not because it was waiting there with the same power, because your return fed it. That is the part most people miss. They think it came back, so it must still be strong. But often, it came back because it was touched again before it had fully settled. This is how the pattern keeps itself going, not only through pain, through interruption, through the repeated refusal to let quiet remain quiet without testing it. What makes this pattern more damaging than it seems is that the mind starts confusing testing with truth. If you touch the old feeling and it responds, then it must still be there. If you check the old pain and it rises, then nothing must have changed. This is the conclusion the system jumps toward. But it is a distorted one, because reactivation is not the same thing as original strength. Something can respond because it was disturbed, not because it was dominating. That difference matters. A bruise touched again still reacts. That does not mean it was not healing. In the same way, an inner state can answer your return without proving that nothing shifted. But the mind rarely sees it this way. It says, "You see, it's still here. It wasn't really over. It never actually settled." And now the checking starts feeling justified, necessary, even wise. This is how quiet gets turned back into tension. Not because quiet was false, because the system kept demanding proof from what needed less contact, not more. That is the hidden loop. A thing begins to settle. You test it. It responds. You mistrust the settling, so you test it again. And each test makes it harder for the system to believe that softening was real. This is why settling often feels less trustworthy than struggle. Struggle is obvious. You can feel it, measure it, organize yourself around it. But settling is quieter. It does not announce itself with certainty. It just becomes less charged, less urgent, less central. And because it is quieter, the mind can mistake it for weakness, for incompleteness, for something not yet proven. So it goes back in. Not because the process failed, because the process was becoming subtle. And subtle change is harder to trust than active discomfort. This is the paradox. The very moment something begins to lose intensity, part of the system starts interrogating it, testing it, pressing on it, looking for the old response, as if calm must defend itself, as if healing must pass an exam. But what settles naturally usually does not need pressure. It needs space, less checking, less contact, less demand to prove that it is real. That is what the mind struggles to give. Because once something is no longer dramatic, attention no longer knows how to relate to it. So it recreates movement, and then it calls that movement honesty, when often it is only mistrust of what was already softening. Once this is seen, something begins to change. Not because the old feeling never answers again, but because the answer is no longer mistaken for proof that nothing was settling. You begin to notice that disturbing something is not the same as discovering the truth about it. Sometimes it is only the refusal to let softness exist without interrogation. That is the deeper shift. The mind no longer says, if it reacts, then it was never healing. It starts to see, it reacted because I touched it again. That difference matters. Because now, settling does not have to prove itself every time attention returns. It can remain partial, quiet, still in process. And that is enough. Enough for you not to test it immediately. Enough for the old state not to be refreshed the moment it starts losing force. Enough for quiet to stop feeling suspicious. This is where trust begins. Not trust in perfection, trust in leaving alone what is already trying to become still. And when that happens, something important returns. Not certainty, rest. The kind of rest that was impossible while every softening was being checked, pressed, and pulled back into activity. That is when the pattern finally weakens. Not when pain disappears, when you stop disturbing what was already starting to settle. This is inner cognition.